Welcome, everyone. My name is Fred Tran. I'm the division manager in the housing department at the city of San Jose. It's just after 1 o'clock, so we could start this presentation. A few housekeeping items. I'm going to do the presentation, and you can ask questions at the end by either pressing the raise hand button, or if you're on your phone, you can press *9. And also you can ask questions in the chat function under Q&A. And today I will be presenting to you an overview of the provision of the COVID-19 Tenant Relief Act of 2020. Also, this webinar will be recorded and it will be posted on our website shortly. You can also email our program or myself directly, where you see my email address right there, with any questions after the presentation. And we'll get started right now. Next. On August 31st of 2020, the state of California enacted a new law, the Tenant Relief Act of 2020, that replaced the city's residential eviction moratorium with a statewide eviction moratorium effective September 1 of 2020. This new state law is commonly known as Assembly Bill, or AB 3088. This act is a statewide law that imposes a temporary moratorium between March 1 of 2020 through January 31 of 2021 on residential evictions. The legislation provides protections for qualifying tenants for failure to pay rent because of financial distress related to COVID-19. This includes an owner of residential real property, a residential rental unit, mobile home parks, or mobile home park spaces or lots. It does not protect tenants of commercial properties. Next. On or before September 30th, a landlord who is owed for the time between March 1, 2020 through August 31 of 2020 may serve a 15-day notice for non-payment of rent. The landlord is required to disclose in this notice the tenant's rights and protections under the Act. The disclosure is also available on the state's website that will be provided at the end of this presentation. Landlords may not charge affected tenants any penalties, fees, or interest on unpaid rents that accrued while the eviction moratorium was in effect. Also, retaliation and harassment against affected tenants who invoke their rights under the eviction moratorium are prohibited. Landlords may begin to recover any unpaid rents of debt from beginning on March 1st, 2021. The small claims court jurisdiction has been temporarily expanded to allow landlords to recover this debt. Tenants will still owe any unpaid rents, and the landlord can sue those tenants in the small claims court, even if the amounts for the rents exceed the limit of $5,000 within the case. Next. Tenants are still responsible for unpaid rents that accrued during the following time periods. The rents cannot be the basis for an eviction. If a tenant has filed or has failed to pay part or all of the rent that was due prior to March 1, 2020, or after January 31, 2020, the tenant is not protected by the Tenant Relief Act, and the landlord may proceed with an eviction notice and/or unlawful detainer. Tenants must provide a declaration of hardship of their to the property owner to receive protection. The declaration of COVID-19 related financial distress must include a written statement specified in the legislation and signed under penalty of perjury. This can be delivered in person, by mail, email, or the method that is used to pay rent if possible. If a tenant fails to provide a signed declaration of COVID-19 related financial distress to the landlord within 15 business days, and the landlord has provided the appropriate notice of demand to pay rent and an unsigned copy of the declaration of COVID-19 related financial distress, the tenant is not protected from an eviction. Affected tenants and landlords may also negotiate their own repayment plan. This is a voluntary agreement between both parties. Before a repayment plan is signed, a landlord must notify the tenant of the notice of their rights under the eviction moratorium related to repayment of past due rents. This form is available on San Jose's Eviction Moratorium website. Tenants that have an annual household income of 130% of median as published by the Department of Housing and Community Development in the official state income limits for 2020 for the county are considered high income tenants. These tenants may need to supply additional documentation if necessary, requested by the landlord. Next. The Tenant Relief Act divides rent debt into two periods, the protected time period and the transition time period. The protected time period covers unpaid rent due between March 1, 2020 through August 31, 2020. If a tenant provides a signed declaration to their landlords of the COVID-related financial distress within 15 days required, they will be protected from being evicted. The unpaid rent during the time period can be claimed in small claims court by the landlord. The transitional time period covers unpaid rent due between September 1, 2020 through January 31, 2021. Unpaid rent due during this transition time period is similar to the protected time period regarding the signed declaration provided by the tenant to the landlord. In addition to the declaration, the tenant will be required to pay 25% of the rent due during the transition time period by March 31, 2021. If the tenant pays the 25% and submits a declaration, they cannot be evicted. The remaining rent balance that is due to the landlord can be claimed through small claims court. Next. The City of San Jose's eviction moratorium was not extended effective August 31, 2020 under the Act. The Act also halts any further local governmental action to address COVID-19 rental debts. It does recognize local repayment provisions and sets the start date for the San Jose's effective date as of September 1, 2020 for the payment period. Tenants who accrued unpaid rents while the eviction moratorium was in effect, essentially from March 17, 2020 through August 31, 2020, must pay back at least 50% of their unpaid rents by February 28 of 2021, and the remaining rent must be paid by August 31, 2021. And also noted, if the tenant is not able to pay the 50%, it's not a basis for an eviction. Next. This concludes my presentation. I want to thank all the property owners within the City of San Jose for being housing providers during this difficult time. Also to the tenants, we understand there are additional burdens to you, and we hope that our program can offer any resources and referrals if possible. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, I have allowed Gloria, if you'd like to share your question.
Yeah. Can I ask 2 questions, please?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you mentioned that if they're unable to pay the 50%, that's not a basis for eviction. So does that, how do you recapture your money if they're unable to pay at least 50%? They can continue on without the landlord having a recourse of eviction?
Regarding the capturing of rent, it depends on which time period the rent falls into.
Mm-hmm.
If the rent is within the protective time period, the March 1, 2020 to August 31, 2020, that
Mm-hmm.
entire amount needs to be claimed through small claims court.
Mm-hmm.
If it falls within the transition time period from September 1, 2020 through January 31, 2021,
Mm-hmm.
it does have to pay 25% of rent due, and the remaining will have to be claimed through small claims court by the landlord.
Okay, thank you for answering that. Then I have another question, and this is a fact that some people are still working, but their employers are paying them cash under the table, and they're claiming that they're in a hardship, but they are still working. So what is the city doing to protect landlords, owners from situations like that? Because that's dishonest.
Well, so that is a legal matter. The critical piece of this is when the tenant signs and submits the declaration, they're submitting that under perjury. So if it escalates and the facts are presented to the court, then the judge would have to determine if.
Okay, so let me just retweet this question. So does the landlord can't ask for any documentation if they say they're not working at their current employer? The landlord has no recourse to get any kind of declaration from the employer saying, no, they're not working. Because you have a lot of employers that are paying cash under the table and people are collecting money. That's a fact. And so the landlords are just, they're being cheated.
If the tenant falls within that high income over the 130%, then the landlord could, if they already have, if they're aware that the tenant falls within that classification, they can request additional support. But if not, the only requirement for the tenant is to submit the declaration signed to the landlord within the 15 days.
Yeah, well, so the restaurants and a lot of the smaller businesses, and if they're not making that 150,000 or whatever that threshold is, and not everybody, but you have a good portion of people who are working, who could pay something, and they're getting away with it by paying cash. That's what I just wanted to say. You haven't built in any safety net for the landlords who really need their money, because they have to continue to pay their mortgage payments, they have to pay taxes, they have to pay utilities, and they're not getting anything from people who are using these loopholes to defraud. That's all I need to say. I know you don't have an answer for that, but I just needed to say that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Gloria. I have the next question from Anil.
Hey, Neil.
Hey, sorry, I came a little late to the meeting, so I only caught the last slide about the repayment procedure. And I just want to clarify because the bill's really complex and on the repayment process for as far as which applies, whether it's the state repayment process or the local repayment process. And I know that since the city of San Jose passed their repayment plan before August 19th, theirs takes an effect. However, it only comes in effect if the repayment process, repayment requirements from the city start before March 21st. Is that how you read it?
Regarding the
March 1st, sorry.
Yeah, regarding the payment plan, actually both are in effect, but essentially the critical piece is with the cities, September 1, 2020 is when the repayment period began, which means that the tenant is required to pay 50% of the
Okay,
outstanding
that
amount
makes sense.
by
Okay,
February 28th. But also the key piece is if the tenant does not make that 50% payment within that date, it's not a basis for an eviction. The tenant would still be protected by the state.
because, well, unless they didn't pay the 25%.
Correct.
So they'd have to pay at least 25% by February 1st to maintain eviction protections.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I don't know if that was mentioned during the presentation. I just want to clarify that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Anil. The next question is going to be from Christian.
Hey, Christian.
Hello. So I'm looking at the city website at that repayment plan form, and it says 1 year after the eviction moratorium end date, but then the eviction moratorium end date on the form says October 17th. So when we send that to residents, wouldn't that be translated as 1 year after October 17th?
Actually, I apologize that the website should be updated, but when we went to council prior, October 17 was the date that the moratorium was extended. When this act was created, it basically ended our moratorium earlier. So the actual end date for the city's eviction moratorium is actually August 31, 2020, which means September 1 is when the payment period for the city begins.
Okay, so you guys will just update that and then we can get the new form.
Correct. I apologize for that.
That's okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you, Christian. So I've received a couple questions through the Q&A. Excuse me, I don't think I introduced myself. My name is Vivian and I am an analyst supporting Fred today. Hopefully I've been able to tackle some of your questions through the Q&A chat box. So if you have any more as we continue this conversation, feel free to add them on there. One of the questions that have come up, Fred, is related to really differentiating the state timeline and really the city's timeline. And so really calling for the attention of landlords who are specifically in the city of San Jose. The request was, if Fred, can you go over the repayment period again between the 6 months and the 1 year? And I'm going to bring it back to the slide so we can take a look one more time.
So regarding this slide, essentially the city's payment period actually begins on September 1 of 2020. And that means that 50% of the outstanding rent must be paid by February 28 of 2021. And the remaining 50% would be due by the August 31, 2021. So it doesn't match up exactly to the states. The states requires that the September 1 of 2020 through January 31 of 2021 be their transition time period. And within that transition time period, 25% of that transition unpaid rent needs to be paid by January 31 of 2021.
Great, thank you. Another question that has come up is regarding how can a landlord recoup some of the past due rent?
Recouping the past due rent, this is where it falls into which time period is. If it's under the protected time period of March 1 of 2020 through August 31 of 2020, that entire balance, assuming that the tenant signs and submits the declaration within the 15 days, that outstanding balance must be claimed through small claims court. If the outstanding rent falls within September 1 of 2020 through January 31 of 2020, that would be the transition time period. Within that transition time period, the tenant would have to pay 25% of that outstanding rent. The remaining 75% would need to be claimed through small claims court.
Fred, can you clarify when can the landlords begin the small claims process? Is it when the tenants are not meeting the 25% threshold?
The earliest that the landlord can start that process is actually March 1 of 2021. And the small claims court plans to expand their operations to accommodate the additional workload that's expected.
Hey, Fred, this is Anil again. Just to clarify, the small claims court caps have also been lifted to accommodate for the cases that were for rent recovery.
Correct. Thanks, Anil.
Great. And another common question that's come up is whether or not or where the slides will be available. And so that will be available on our website. That's sanjoseca.gov/eviction moratorium. And again, that's sanjoseca.gov/eviction moratorium. And there you will also find a link to the state FAQ. That's also the resource I've been sending some of the participants through the Q&A. And that's been an excellent resource. Again, this is really overseen by the state, and here at the city, we wanted to give you an overview of the information as well as the overlap regarding the repayment period that the city of San Jose also oversees.
Yeah, you definitely want to use that state link. It's very helpful. It gives quite a bit of detail of the specific language that's required within the notice and declaration. So I would recommend both landlords and tenants to refer to that. And the state actually also just recently developed a tool, and it's got a portal for both the tenant and the landlord to guide you through this process that can be very complicated.
And lastly, the question is about how does this federal eviction moratorium by the CDC overlap with the state and with the city?
For this, the CDC order, it's there is no time limit. So for the state, there's a 15-day time limit for that notice to be returned. Regarding the CDC, there is no time limit. And the state has the 130% for high income. For CDCs, they actually have an income limit of 9,900,000 and below for single, or 198,000 for below to be covered for specific hardships. And finally, the biggest thing for the CDC is theirs goes through December 31 of 2020. So it actually is 1 month less than what the state's is that goes through January 31 of 2021.
Great, thank you. And so another question that's come up is, so really, again, this is a state eviction moratorium. There are some languages that are available on the state website regarding like what the 15-day notice looks like. what the notice should be to the tenant. So Fred, can you talk a little bit more about where landlords can look for these forms?
Yeah, definitely. We can post them for you, but it is the state's website. And the critical piece is the notice, because within the notice, it actually contains the declaration. And that declaration is very specific to how the wording should be constructed for the tenant to return that information back to the landlord. Do you want to try to post it real quick, Vivian, or should we include it later?
I can go ahead and post it in the chat. I've been doing that a little bit as well.
Okay.
I think we still have a couple hands up. Anil, do you have another follow-up?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to the resources you've mentioned that are going to be your website, our website has also been updated to provide a number of one-pagers that answer specific questions in detail, such as how this impacts with the CDC eviction moratorium, more insight about the actual bill, and also we've updated 9 of our existing forms to take into account both the AB 3088 and the San Jose ARO requirements, so that these forms recognize the different ordinances, both the state and local level, and have incorporated changes in form to accommodate the different changes. So you can use these forms within specifically for San Jose. So to get to that website, you just have to go to caanet.org/AB 3088.
Great. Thank you, Anil.
So that, I think I see another hand from Laura. And so Laura, go ahead and ask your question. Laura, did you have a question? I'm going to go ahead and lower your hand and feel free to raise it up again if you need to. All right, I have another question from Martha.
Martha.
Sorry. I was under the impression that city law could offer more protections than state law. They could not offer less, but they could offer more. Now, for some reason, I was told this is not correct as far as this law goes. So is it correct that the state has preempted all other city action?
That is correct. The state does preempt the city.
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question. Always before, Fred, I've been told in meetings since 2004 at City Hall that if the state of California, I'm just making this up, tells people that they have 6 months to pay back, the city can pass an ordinance that gives them 9 months. In other words, the city cannot give less than the state, but they can give more. So I'm confused as to why apparently the state has preempted city action. Can you confirm that they have preempted any further city action?
They have. The state has preempted any further city action regarding eviction moratoriums.
Okay, and is that in the language of 3088? Is it actually in that language?
There is, I'll have to refer to it, but it does say that it halts any further governmental local action towards rent debt. So it's very specific, but it's specific in certain areas of each moratorium, but overall it does preempt the city's moratorium. Okay,
great. And as a follow-up question, this is just hypothetical, if the state had not put that language in to 3088, the city could have given more, correct?
If the state did not, correct.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so that has everyone's questions answered in the Q&A. And then also, Anil, thank you for sharing your website. And again, it is caanet.org/AB3088. And so with that, we thank everyone for joining us today. We're very excited and we look forward to continue keeping in touch. If you haven't already, feel free to email Fred if you'd like to be added onto our e-blast. That's the best way to keep in the loop. And we are looking forward to continue sharing information with everyone.
Yeah, and I'd actually want to mention a few programs that the city has available. We do have rental assistance. So if there are tenants struggling to pay rent, please contact our program to get a referral for the rental assistance. Or if property owners are out there, please let your tenants know that that's available. And if it does get approved, those funds go directly to the property owner. Next, we do have a housing mediation program that's available that we could have our staff work with both tenant and landlords to go through the mediation and hopefully get a possible repayment plan in place so the tenant can be stable and the landlord can start receiving cash flows. And we always offer free legal referrals. And finally, the Law Foundation is working on a collaborative court to hopefully assist with both tenants and landlords in the future. So yeah, so one final note, I do appreciate everybody attending today. And when you do call into our program, please be patient with our staff or when you're emailing. They are human and doing as best they can. And we always want to support the community during this pandemic and offer as much assistance as possible. Hopefully we're all working together and we can get through this. Thank you.